Well, the beginning of the project for us was in, I believe, 1984. I had just relocated recently from New York to Los Angeles, where I was taking over design at the William Pereira office. And William Pereira was a designer of the Transamerica Pyramid in San Francisco and a lot of work in California and abroad. And we were one, as I understood it, one of three firms that was asked to make a proposal. We were given about a month to put our ideas together. Nobody told us what we needed to do. A month is fast in architecture. Architecture takes years. So you have a month, you better make good choices, right, of what you do and what you don't do. And I thought about it and I decided that because we hadn't met with these people and we hadn't had the benefit of a conversation, and there were a number of different people involved, that instead of doing one scheme with the pretense that, oh, we know what you should have, this is it, right? Don't you love it? Instead of that, we would do two schemes that would illuminate important differences and hopefully elicit conversation. And we could see what the dynamic was between the various partners, and we could see what mattered more and mattered less. So we did two schemes, and one was, I think they were both interesting, but one was, I would say, more standard, sat on the ground, series of rectangles, broad facade and entry. So from Highway 29, you could see this thing, even if you just waved at it and drove by, or if you pulled in, either way. And then the other scheme was more adventuresome. It kind of sunk down into the ground. It had this sloping volcanic-like berm, and there was this kind of semi-private open space that you passed through. It was sort of more scenographic, long driveway, break in the berm, up the ramp, through the courtyard, into the round rotunda, down the coil stair. It was thought about that way, almost like choreography of a dance. And we presented it, and the folks that were there, and there were only the Mondavis. Baron Philippe, who was alive then, was not able to be at that interview, so he didn't hear it. And Bob and the group, it seemed to us, favored the radial scheme, the more adventuresome scheme. And that was good for us because we liked it too. That was our favorite scheme. So we got the note that, yes, they were interested in that, but we would need to share with the Baron. And we said, well, where's the Baron? And he's home in Pauillac. So we flew to Paris, to Bordeaux, to Pauillac, and I had best part of 2 days with the Baron Philippe. And we had a dinner together in the library, which is where he takes his dinner frequently when he's home. And library, beautiful stone, nice things, beautiful food, wine tasted by him, picked by him, all that. And then he said, well, we'll meet in the morning, come to my bedroom. And then I remembered the story I'd heard earlier that when Bob Mondavi came to the winery years before, he met the Baron in the morning. The Baron spends the morning in the bedroom. So I thought, well, that's different, but we're going to do that. And so in the morning I went in, and just as promised, he was there in his robe, propped up in bed, big bed, Western King, or whatever they say in France, right? 2 dogs, tray, books, and I pulled up a side chair at the foot of the bed, and we started to talk. His English was perfect. He asked me about California, and we talked about it. He said he remembers Santa Barbara favorably because his late wife, Pauline, that was her favorite place. I don't know if they lived there, but they had a house, and she would go there a lot. They would go there a lot. In any event, it was very cordial. And then I pulled out the 2 models and a couple of drawings that we had presented to the Mondavis earlier. And he looked at them. He was quiet, listened attentively, asked some questions. The Baron said that he favored the more adventuresome scheme, the semicircular scheme. So we were happy about that. That was what we wanted as well. And importantly, he agreed with what the Mondavis did, even though they were 9,000 miles apart. We were in agreement, so we thought, well, that's good going forward. And he said he also likened it, which I thought was poetic in a way. He likened it. He liked the curve because he said the curve is like the grape. It's like the barrel. It's like the tank. It's like the glass. There's a quality that reverberates about the winemaking process. So he liked the curve a lot. For Bob Mondavi, it was very important to him that he had the sense of an in-grade cellar, that somehow you went down into a cellar. So the winery, at that time, we had these simple little wood models, so there was much more to learn and to investigate. But if you go to the winery today, you realize, or you may realize, that you ramp up slightly to go down. So you're half up and half down, but nevertheless, the public floor, the cellar, is below and is bermed for insulation, all of that. And I think that was Bob's priority. The curvature was the Baron's priority, and they were very smart and effective in sort of coming together on those things. So we had the concept, and then the issue was, okay, how are we going to develop it with all the rest of the detail? Well, as an architect, if you're busy, you do a lot of work, and you have multiple clients, different personalities, different priorities, all of that. The most interesting commissions and the ones that are the most fun are where the people are fun and adventuresome. And this was a very adventuresome group. There was a lot of confidence in these people. They were secure. They would suggest things to be tried. And so we could go further. And I don't actually think that the process of getting to a finished product is a process of answering all the questions. It's more a process of framing the questions and then letting the clients, if they're great clients, struggle, figure that out. It's a provocation more than an answer. And through that process of provocation and questioning, you get further, you get a deeper idea embedded in the architecture. And sometimes the people then that come in to experience the art, your guests, your folks that are here, sometimes they don't understand. They weren't part of that process. They don't get it, but they get it here, and they get it here. They understand something is different about this place I'm in. And it's usually the result of that interesting, provocative adventure that you all went through with the clients. Well, once we decided that the building should kind of emerge out of the landscape, I mean, the basic of the landscape, you all live there, you know it. It's a very flat valley floor, and then two sets of coastal ranges behind. So the valley was going to sit in the valley floor. That was the land we had. So the fact that it would erupt up and out a very flat berm seemed to be an effective way to do that. And then to carve it out in the middle, so you realize you were in a place of priority, of choice, right? And then you'd landscape the exterior of it. So the vine heads and the green of the berm would kind of meld together. That would further kind of, it become a work of landscape architecture as much as architecture, right? The materiality of the building per se, it ended up being white Texas limestone, because that was, again, we were working with what would you say, an historic legacy family from Europe, many generations, right? And then we were working with a family that had kind of made enormous success in California through technical innovation and winemaking in like one lifetime. So these were very different things. So, how do we make that all work together? My thought was, well, let's use materials that interact between both cultures. Though we could have gone to France for limestone, but we can get it in Texas, and it's very high quality and it's very reminiscent. And the Rothschilds were happy with it when we went through materials and we looked at the materials. All the wood soffits and all of that are, California redwood. So we had limestone, which is a French type material. We had California redwood, which was an indigenous material. We had native landscape climbing up, which would be normal to California on the exterior. So we used a series of materials that kind of mixed everything. We frequently used concrete floors because I actually was born in the Salinas Valley, and my father was a plant pathologist, so I spent a lot of time in the fields and in his greenhouses and labs and all this. And it's an industrial process. It can be an extremely elegant, artful process, but in the end, it's agriculture at a very high level. And the idea of concrete and wine and the acids involved in all of that. Concrete is a robust material. It can be very beautiful. The Romans used it for a couple thousand years. Can't be that bad, right? So we sort of mixed industrial materials and then very highly refined materials. And a lot of the details in the stone are neoclassical details, I'll be frank about it, from the late 18th century in France. Claude Boulet and Nicolas Ledoux two romantic classic architects. If you look them up, they didn't build a lot, but they imagined a lot, and they embraced sort of the late classicism of France. And so, like the bull noses and the rusticated stones and all those things, we sort of brought that to sort of bring the Rothschilds to California, right? And Bob was across the street, so it was good for him. Architecture trends are a little promiscuous, to be honest about it, meaning one day or one year or one decade, something's in, and then the next decade, it's out and something else is in. But it does come around. And one of the conversations that keeps coming around, it gets lost for 10 or 20 years and it comes around again, is how does the future relate to the past? Like, does the future exclude the past? Does it just come from heaven and some brilliant person invent something that's unrelated? Did Stravinsky write work in the teens and 20s that had nothing to do with Romantic classicism? No, he actually understood all of that work and then created a new language from it. So I think that when architects are interested in talking about this topic, the past and the future, that then the building becomes relevant to that conversation, because several people I kept hearing at the winery, they had visitors here and they referred to it as Starship Enterprise. And that was the last thing on my mind. I mean, those of us of a certain age remember Star Trek, right? And shiny, bright objects and lights that flicker in the galaxy beyond. No, it wasn't really about any of that, but somehow they understood the modernity, the sort of contemporary futuristic quality of the building. You know, there was never really a building of all the wineries, and there's some wonderful wineries, there was never one really like this. Again, it retained its sort of provocative nature, and I think the future is about provocation, right? You have to disrupt and recreate new. Well, I think it's normal for all of us to think about what's happening around us in our own time. It's obvious, it's in front of us, all that. But actually, it's a flow, right? And Napa Valley in the 19th century had vineyards and had Europeans who were here and people who were native to America here. And then we went through farming when Prohibition. The valley was largely fruit and orchards, right? And a lot of that industry died down. And then we got out of that phase and we began the ascension again of the wine industry. And the climate and everything was perfect for it. California has an agricultural tradition. You have the talent, the ability of the universities, the labs. You've got all of that. And I think I felt that, and this is maybe a small bit of hubris, but I thought we have the clients, we have the Mondavis, arguably the gentleman and the company that has elevated California winemaking to the highest level. We have the Rothschilds, of a historic family, famous, and now first growth wine, wasn't before, now acknowledged. I said, well, these are good clients. If we're going to take the Napa Valley the next place, I think these would be, sorry to say this, but the horses to ride on in that race, right? If these people can take it further, and remember that this was kind of the beginning of globalization. And without getting into the politics of that, if Robert Mondavi and Philippe de Rothschild could come together and make a great wine together in California, well then, why can't anyone, if they can get along and they can agree on what level they're going to go for, why can't they do it in Australia and Italy and Argentina and Chile, et cetera, et cetera? And they have, and they did. And to their credit, we just gave them a building which was a platform, a stage for them to show the world and Napa that you can go as high as you want, and you can go out as far as you want, and you can elevate your standard as high as you're committed to, right? And I think it was a watershed in a way in the early moments of globalization for what's possible and where your resources are in the world. My experience with conversations between the Mondavis and the Rothschilds in first person would be more with Bob and Philippe, the Baroness, because I saw Bob initially, then I saw the Baron initially, and then within a couple of years or so, the Baron passed away. There was a moment, which was really a matter of a number of months, where things were quiet. We weren't sure what was going to happen. Then we got wind that the Baroness was going to take over control of the company and the wine mouton and Opus One, her portion of that. And we didn't really know what that would mean. And then she requested that we come to Pauillac again and present it to her. Now, Bob agreed he loved it. The Baron agreed he loved it. Now the Baron, as unfortunately, is not with us. And now the daughter is going to be there. Now we have a third person that we hope is going to love it, but we don't know. So that was an interesting kind of third meeting as well. Well, the story of the wood maquette, it was my third trip to a principal, in this case, the Baroness Philippe. And we were told that by the Mondavis that Philippe wanted to see the choice. So in a sense, we were back potentially to stage one. We had been working on this adventuresome scheme, but she wanted to see both. And she wanted to make her own view of that, which was her prerogative. So I flew to Pauillac again a second time, several years later, and presented it to her. And we were in a salon, a rather casual space, and there were comfortable chairs on the floor and a little coffee table. And I put the two models on the table and I pulled out, and I just laid the drawings on the floor. We could sort of look at the floor, see them. And I went through a presentation of it, and she said, "Oh, it's very interesting." At that time, the model had, of the semicircular scheme, had a little plexiglass canopy in the incision, which opened the entrance between the two berms. And she said, "Well, what is that for?" And she was a colorful woman. She was very, obviously very smart. She was very witty. She was very outspoken. And so you always got the full message. And so I said, "Well, if you're at Highway 29 and you've got, a fifth of a mile or, several hundred yards to get to the front door, you'll see the front door by having this arched canopy." And she says, "Oh, no, we don't need that." I said, "Well, it's an idea of seeing it and you know where you're going." No, too light, whatever. And so we went back and forth playfully, but she dug in on it. And then at some point we kind of agreed to everything. That issue she made herself clear, but we didn't really make a decision. And I think I dismissed myself for a minute, maybe take a break, whatever. And I came back in and she's, "Okay, all done." And I began to pick up the models and put them in the boxes to ship back to California. And I noticed that the little glass canopy had been crumpled and was lying on the floor. So I guess we didn't need to have more words on that topic. It was clear we wouldn't be having the canopy, right? So that's the story of the wooden maquette. As far as other moments, I was in my mid-30s. So there was a lot I had to learn about everything maybe, but winemaking. I grew up in a Mormon family. There was no wine. So my learning about wine started about 18 when I said, well, I think I need to go another route here. And I collected wine and I enjoyed it. And I was in the Napa Valley a bit in the university days. But when I began to spend time with Bob Mondavi, Bob was the most natural gentleman, gracious person, and he was in a relationship with Philippe, the Baroness. They didn't always agree, but he was always kind, and I think he was basically trying to channel her energy, and there was a lot of energy into the outcome, and that was a optimistic way. He was a very optimistic man, and he had a natural way. People were drawn to him for his authenticity. I remember being at dinners where he would liken the wine. He said it's soft like a baby's bottom. And anybody who knew him would have heard that because he used it all the time. I remember him referring to wine as the beverage of choice of the Old Testament, right? And then I remember one day at the vineyard room across the way, sitting outside in the summer. It was very hot, and we're sitting at a table, and we're warm and all of that. And we have some very nice wine there, red wine. And he took his glass of ice water and he just poured it into his wine and then drank it. And I thought, can you do that? I thought, well, if Bob Mondavi can do it, I guess I can do it, right? So, there was permission and you're comfortable around him. He had a way of connecting at a very kind of basic level, which was nice. People now and in the future generations, I hope they all enjoy the building. It's an unusual building by any measure. So hopefully it will excite them, interest them, enchant them, perplex them, whatever is good, whatever they can learn from it, I think is great. I hope it reminds them. It stands as a kind of a measure of people from across the world coming together and doing something and being immensely successful through their ability to work together. That in itself is a lesson. It's good anytime, but maybe particularly right now, that would be a good lesson, right? So I think that's what I hope for the winery. I hope it stands for that. I hope it reminds them of the families that thought it up and did it. And I think that, again, the concept of the relationship between history and the future, that's something we always, every artist, every human, I would hope, would always be thinking about in their lives. Well, if the question is, do I have an emotional response when I see the additions we made to it? Actually, I have an emotional response when I go to a client's building that I did and they maintain it perfectly and beautifully. That's my emotional response. Now, I do a lot of buildings and I come back and they're not all maintained beautifully, or sometimes they're altered, or someone's thrown a whole bunch of plants in the middle of it thinking that might help, when in my view, that doesn't often help. You have plenty of plants around in the case of Opus One, plenty of plants around the building. But it was flattering and a great opportunity to add, because my earlier statement about what's the relationship between the past and the future, well, to a certain extent, this building was built some 30 years ago, so it's a part of the past too now. And so we have to ask ourselves at every point in time, well, what's the future, right? So the language, if you will, the architectural language of the partners area and all of that addition, I think is more about the relationship to inside outside kind of ecology, right? And it's more about kind of contemporary thinking, right? I think we're less constrained as we were 30 years ago to really have symbols of, at that time, contemporary California culture and historic French European culture. We're now kind of all one family, if you will. It's a new generation. The moment you stop innovating, you stop living. Can't do that. And Opus One is just like any important artful venture. You have to constantly rethink and evolve. So it's a much more modern space. The whole wall is open to the outside. So we're not, the original building, while I talk about it as a piece of landscape architecture, you open a door, you close a door, you're in a space, you're outside of a space. No, this you're not sure if you're inside or outside. The famous line by Frank Lloyd Wright of Philip Johnson, my former boss, his house in New Canaan, Connecticut, the glass house. He says, well, I don't know if I should take my hat off. I don't know if I'm inside or outside, right? In a sense, that room kind of carries that spirit.